Daniel Kostick presents Premiership Elections in Albertan History. This election took place on June 15, 1993, and was the 23rd election in the province's history. After losing his seat, Premier Don Getty won a by-election in Stettler and returned to the legislature. His popularity continued to be poor as he continued his interventionist policy when it came to the government investing in the private sector. His term was most notable for a total breakdown of intergovernmental relations between the federal and provincial branches of the Progressives. In 1991, following the nosedive by the federal PCs after the failure of the Meech Lake Accords, the Getty PCs formally cut ties with the federal party. Policy differences would be ongoing, as Getty would fight with Prime Minister Brian Mulroney on issues such as the GST and enacted legislation that made English the only official language in Alberta. Despite these differences, Getty remained a strong supporter of the federal PCs. This choice would haunt Getty, as the unpopularity of the PCs was rubbing off on him, and many PC members had begun shifting their support to the newly formed Reform Party. The state of the economy and his own approval ratings were not the only thing that Getty had to worry about. Since taking over the Liberal Party in 1988, Lawrence Decore, MLA for Edmonton-Glengarry, had rebranded the party into a standard center-right group. This proved to be a burden to the PCs, who had previously been the sole party occupying that space, as since doubling their seats in 1989, the Liberals had only continued to build support across the province.
I'd like to tell every Albertan that there is a new party on the horizon.
Decore, for his part, had his popularity continue to grow in not only Edmonton, but in rural Alberta as well, which had been a traditional support base for the PCs. In 1992, following polls being released showing that the PCs would go down to a massive defeat if he stayed on as leader, Don Getty announced he would be resigning as premier and PC leader following the election of his successor. His legacy would not be a strong one, as he quickly dropped from the public memory after resigning. Contrary to Lougheed, Getty would also rarely comment on political matters and return to the private sector, being named to the Order of Canada in 1998. In 2012, in recognition of his football career, he was inducted into the London Sports Hall of Fame and died of heart failure in 2016. The race to replace Don Getty was unlike anything in the history of the Conservative Party at the time. Firstly, the party moved away from the caucus system to one member, one vote. There would now also be 2 rounds of voting. The first round where all candidates would participate, and a second round 1 week later, which would see the top 3 candidates compete. Memberships for the PC party could also be purchased between voting rounds. This would also be the largest field of candidates in any leadership race among all parties, with 9 candidates running. Of the 9 candidates, only 5 stood out. Nancy Bukowski, Minister of Health and MLA for Edmonton-Glenora; Ralph Klein, Minister of Environment and MLA for Calgary-Elbow; Doug Mayne, Minister of Culture and Multiculturalism and MLA for Edmonton-Parkland; John Oldring, Minister of Family and Social Services and MLA for Red Deer South; and Rick Orman, Minister of Energy and MLA for Calgary-Montrose. Almost immediately, 2 camps formed and gathered around one of 2 candidates. The Red Tory faction got behind Bukowski immediately, as she had been high-profile in cabinet and represented an Edmonton riding. She had become a darling of the Getty establishment. The other wing, composed of a more populist faction, got behind Klein, who prior to entering cabinet was a highly popular mayor of Calgary and local TV journalist. He had set his brand as an ordinary Albertan, which gave him widespread appeal to both urban and rural voters. Klein's personality and campaign drew ire from other candidates, notably Doug Mayne, who said that Alberta did not need a smoking, drinking, paving, lad-handing premier. Oldring, along with serving as a minor cabinet member, was also the first person from Red Deer since Cam Kirby to run for leader. The final major candidate, Rick Orman, was arguably more of an establishment figure than Bukowski with his background, and also ran a strong campaign. He would more or less become a type of middle ground candidate between Klein and Bukowski. On November 28th, the first ballot in the race would take place. Onlookers were shocked at how close the vote was, as Bukowski beat Klein by just 1 vote. The pair would move on to the second ballot along with Orman, who finished third with 14.51% of the vote. Despite advancing, Orman would withdraw from the contest the next day, leaving only Bukowski and Klein. On December 5th, with support from rural and Calgary voters, Klein made a convincing victory over Bukowski, taking 59.1% compared to 40.54%. This victory not only made Klein the new PC party leader, but also the new premier. Echoing the rhetoric from his leadership campaign, Klein adopted adopted the mantra that the government was out of the business of business. He would adopt the fiscal policy of the New Zealand Minister of Finance, Sir Roger Douglas, which removed controls over the economy and introduced widespread privatization of government services. In contrast to Getty, Klein downsized the cabinet to 17 members and replaced 22 committees for super committees. He would also give cabinet ministers and MLAs a 5% pay cut while reducing the size of the public sector. During the 1993 budget speech, Jim Dinning, provincial treasurer and MLA for Calgary Shaw, announced a 20% cut in spending over 4 years in an effort to balance the provincial budget. This launched a series of protests called Grey Power, where seniors protested the cuts in housing and subsidies. Due to the lagging support for the PCs, angry voters moved en masse to support the Liberal Party. The primary sacrificial lamb of this shift ended up being the NDP under Ray Martin, MLA for Edmonton Norwood. Since the Liberals were advocates for fiscal responsibility, an issue that clicked with Albertans, the NDP were left as the only party advocating for a larger and more centralized government. This, coupled with Decore being a highly popular former mayor of Edmonton, meant that the NDP would face struggles even in its traditional stronghold. The rise of the Federal Reform Party had an unexpected benefit for one group in particular. Since being relegated to the political fringe in 1982, Social Credit was beginning to see a boost in its popularity. Positioning itself again to the right of the PCs, it became the final stop for conservative voters who were through with the PCs both federally and provincially. Additionally, the party saw a return to its religious roots. With the party originally heavily influenced by evangelical Christianity under William Aberhart, the party would see a boost in support from the Alberta Mormon community. After the party named Randy Thorsteinson as leader, his status as a practicing Mormon attracted large groups of LDS church members to the party. So, my friends, I would now like to turn your attention to a new segment that I like to call Da Board. So, what is Da Board? Well, this is the place that I'm setting aside for cool tidbits of information that don't really fit into the other segments, or that I think are neat. That is the purpose of Da Board. So, what is our neat and interesting fact today? I know what you're thinking, but no, it's not the time that the provincial government owned a strip club. I don't know if you've noticed, but in every decade there's been some new phenomenon or trend that comes into the world of politics and has at least some measurable impact. Allow me to demonstrate. 1910s, we had the labor and nonpartisan movements. 1920s, the UFA. 1930s, social credit. 1940s, the independent movement. 1950s, Mr. Frank Pop himself. 1960s, okay, yeah, my theory falls apart here. Moving on. 1970s, the PCs. And lastly, the 1980s had the Western Canada concept. So what was the movement of the 1990s, you ask? Well, it's a little something called the Natural Law Party. This was a nationwide movement that, frankly, still confuses me as to what it's really about. So how about this? Let's watch some of their campaign material, and I'll let you decide for yourselves what their deal is. Sunabine, I faccio.
During this election, you've heard a lot about yogic flying and the experience of bubbling bliss. That's because 7,000 yogic flyers can create a perfect government with the ability to satisfy everyone. All of our national problems are basically caused by stress. And the best antidote is transcendental meditation and 7,000 yogic flyers, which can eliminate stress in the whole country, create an integrated national consciousness, and prevent problems. For a perfect government, vote the Natural Law Party.
Okay, now that you've all been scarred like I have, back to the video. Also notable about this election was the retirement of one particular MLA. Raymond Speaker, former Minister of Municipal Affairs and MLA for Littlebow, had been serving as MLA since 1963 during the height of the Manning government. Initially elected under social credit, he also ran as an independent and representative candidate before crossing the floor to the PCs. His retirement was significant as it marked the exit of the final part of the social credit government from the legislature. During the campaign, the race would quickly turn into a two-way race between Klein and Decore. Klein's move since becoming premier had moved the PCs into alignment with the Liberal Party, and Decore found himself trying to find new ways to argue with the ideas he himself had been advocating for years.
Well, Lawrence couldn't have said it better. Of course, that's what I've been saying all along.
Decore had placed the Liberals in the position to form government for the first time since 1921, and Klein found himself working to show the party had changed from the ways of the Getty government.
There are people who say, Ralph, you're the premier. And I say, well, yeah, but I'm also Ralph.
As both leaders were former mayors of Alberta's largest cities, Klein in Calgary and Decore in Edmonton, some voters called this race the Battle of the Mayors. Both men had also gone head-to-head during the last legislative sessions.
The minister acts like a mouse, squeaks like a mouse, and is a mouse. Is a mouse. Is a mouse. Marble.
Well, Mr. Decore, you are named to the House.
Klein ended up staying the course with his promise to eliminate the provincial debt, while Decore worked the angle that the PCs had lost moral authority to govern. And here are the results. Ralph Klein won, winning 51 out of a possible 83 seats and 44.49% of the popular vote, down 8 seats and up 0.2% since 1989. Next came Lawrence Decore, whose Liberals won 32 seats and 39.73% of the popular vote, up 24 seats and 11.05% since 1989. Next came Ray Martin, whose NDP won 0 seats and 11.01% of the popular vote, down 16 seats and 15.28% since 1989. Finally came Randy Thorsteinson, whose Social Credit Party won 0 seats and 2.41% of the popular vote, even in seats and up 1.94% since 1989. Despite being on the way out a year prior, Klein managed to reinvigorate the PCs and lead them to their 7th consecutive victory. Despite carrying a majority of rural Alberta and Calgary, the government was completely shut out of Edmonton. Under Decore, the Liberals created the largest opposition since 1971, and in the province's history at the time. The night for the Liberals was only made better by the party completely sweeping Edmonton. Martin's NDP fared poorly, being swept out of the legislature, and for the first time since 1967, had won no seats in a general election. Klein had successfully rebranded the PCs and would continue the privatization of government services. I'll see you in the next one.